I'm a board member of Focus for Health, an organization that my father founded, and I'm also chairman of the board of the Siegel Family Foundation. Sorry, I didn't realize we started. Technology is not my strong suit, but we're adjusting to different times. I want to thank everyone for coming out and participating in this important discussion today. I represent the wealthy white male class with power. I acknowledge this, and I've used my power and privilege to be an ally, but of course, that isn't enough. I'm early on my learning journey to understand better how to dismantle the harmful effects of systematic racism here in the United States. In the past few months, I've come to realize how complex and ingrained some of the differences that exist when it comes to the treatment of African Americans in our society. I know I don't have to worry about my children being arrested or selling music at a mall or being stopped by police when walking down the street. It's hard for me to comprehend potentially living daily with these or more severe challenges, especially coming from my background. The disadvantages that people of color face have always bothered myself, my father, and the Siegel family. Many of you may not know, but I'm chairman of the board of the Siegel Family Foundation, where we have an annual budget of over $18 million a year to support organizations in sub-Saharan Africa with a deliberate diversity, equity, and inclusion lens on how we deploy capital. Since I first started doing this work in 2010, working in Africa, and we began building a strong team on the ground. We have developed a strategy to shift decision-making power closer to the communities we serve. We now have a staff of 18 people, 12 of whom are African, which makes us unique among our foundation peers. Over time, we decided to focus primarily on funding African-led organizations. We found that locally led organizations would have a significantly more difficult time raising funding than expat-led organizations, causing them to grow half as quickly. In fact, just 2% of international aid funding flowing to Africa goes to locally led organizations. We set out to disrupt this dynamic. This has allowed us to be more just, more impactful, and more cost-effective in our philanthropy. It has also helped us to contribute to not only resolving existing issues, but also addressing the reasons why they existed in the first place. On the Focus for Health side, I'm excited that my father, Jen, our executive director, and the organization have decided to tackle issues of inequality in the United States. While we do not claim to have easy solutions to long-term problems, I do think that a logical first step is hosting conversations like this one, so we can all learn from the lived experiences of the experts on the panel who have made the righting of historical injustice their life's work. Perhaps over time, we can find a better path forward or cause others more powerful than ourselves to take on the issues of inequality in a serious and practical manner. One thing I do know is that Focus for Health will never stop fighting for what is just and fair. We always say that those close to the problem must be close to the solution. None are more suited than this group of panelists to lead a conversation on what transforming from trauma to healing and thriving could look like. And now I'm honored to introduce Todd Belcore of Social Change. Todd has been honored by the White House as a champion of change, the American Bar Association's Young Lawyer of the Year, and National Bar Association's Best Activist, and 3 other national awards for his work as a lawyer, mediator, law professor, policy advocate, and nonprofit founder. As a policy advocate, he's successfully fighting to pass 23 laws relating to jobs, benefiting over 5 million people nationwide. As a lawyer, he served over 1,000 people. As a mediator, he's helped mediate multi-million-dollar class action disputes relating to race and discrimination. As a professor in law, Todd created a class called Eradicating the New Jim Crow that he's taught at the University of Chicago Law and Northwestern University. Currently, Todd is executive director of Social Change, a national nonprofit committed to liberation via storytelling, organizing, direct action, and policy advocacy, with hubs in Chicago, LA, Sacramento, and New York City. And Todd, you can take it from here.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much to the Focus for Health team, all of you all in the closet and beyond, in the mobile beach unit. Just want to say thank you all, truly, jokes aside, for all you've done to open up the doors for conversations just like this at this really critical time. I am located in Chicago, and we are unfortunately ground zero for a lot of the uprising revolving around injustice, police accountability, police abuse. And it's certainly it means a lot to me individually, but a lot to our organization, Social Change, to have opportunity to speak out in this forum and serve as a moderator for these incredible human beings I'll tell you more about shortly. I just want to make sure I give the people who are listening a roadmap over what to expect in terms of what this conversation represents. You may have seen the flyer, but to be more clear, we're not going to spend the entire time talking about trauma and abuse and all those things. We're also going to be going from what trauma is and why it's so acute as it relates to the population of Black males, to talking more about triumph and what Black men deserve. And it's a remarkable conversation that you probably haven't heard yet, because the whole notion of deserving is a dangerous one for this country to really confront. And I think it's really important to have that conversation, but more importantly, to have it with the expert panelists that we have joining us today. Let me tell you a little bit about the rock stars gracing us with their expertise and wisdom today. Let me start with Lorenzo Lewis. If you don't mind raising your hand, CEO Lorenzo, award-winning speaker. You may have seen him in his TED Talks. He wanted to make sure we spotlighted that he's an incredible father, a husband. He's been featured in Oprah magazine as a 2020 health hero, but he's also been recognized by Jay-Z's Rock Nation, and you may have seen him in Nick Cannon's publication. He's a creator and CEO of Confess Project, which is an incredibly important way of leveraging the power of the barbershop to combat the notion of mental health stigma. And in his work in behavioral health, he's reached over 30,000 people in 14 cities nationwide. And not only is he an incredible advocate for mental health, but also an incredible advocate for entrepreneurialism and helping people really be in a position to provide for themselves and their families in a meaningful way. So I want to say thank you for joining us today, CEO Lewis. I also want to say thank you to our award-winning executive director and co-founder of Mortar Cincinnati, Alan Woods, who also, and let me take a step back. I asked all the panelists to say, you know, everyone is used to having a long bio read about them and, you know, making sure people fall asleep before the conversation even begins. So I said, fellas, just tell me 3 things you really want me to highlight. And I want to make sure I take time aside to say all these brothers made sure of all the millions of accolades they have, that they said, you know, make sure people know that my husband and father, those are some of the most important things to them in terms of how they identify themselves and how they want the world to know them. So what I'm adding are things that they didn't even feel like were necessary for part of their introduction, but I thought it was necessary given all their incredible accomplishments and accolades. So you have a better appreciation of not only who they are as people, but how the world sees them as well. So Alan Woods also wanted me to highlight that he's a father, entrepreneur. He's been an entrepreneur all his life. He's gone from selling candy to his classmates, you know, mixed CDs and things like that, mixed tapes, actually, as a parking attendant, and to being inspired by Gordon Parks and being a photographer, now helping others realize their entrepreneurial dreams and their dreams as relates to business all throughout Ohio and beyond. He, as I mentioned, is one of the co-founders of Mortar Cincinnati. They're not just located in Cincinnati, even though they are in 7 neighborhoods there. They're also in 4 other cities. And they're doing a lot of work to really not just create an entrepreneurial model to give people the tools necessary to start their own businesses and provide for themselves, but also incorporating a really important holistic element to ensure that people, at the end of the day, are getting the mental health resources and the other resources they need to be whole as a person. And that's what makes them such a valuable contributor to this conversation. I also want to say Dr. Jackson will be joining us. He's here. He's also a founder, but a chief dreamer of Village of Wisdom. And he also wanted to be highlighted for his contribution to society, not only through that work, but being a husband and father and former teacher. And the Village of Wisdom is about expanding and protecting Black genius. And it's a really important process. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we talk about overcoming trauma and why it's important really to head on. And he's doing it in a way that he's not just, making sure this kind of carving aside time for people in the education space, but he's also making sure he's fighting to create and ensure culturally affirming classrooms and institutions. So people can embrace who they are and be proud of who they are and feel celebrated and not just tolerated. So that's an important thing that we'll also be talking on as a nuanced part of the discussion going forward. And then last but not least, certainly Dr. Charles Clayton Daniels. He is one of the founder and creator of Father's Uplift. He's also an author of the book called Pre-Father Care, Prenatal Care for Fathers. And it's important that we honor him for the work he's done, not only as being an incredible father and a humble servant, as we highlight, he's also responsible for creating the first mental health clinic dedicated entirely to fathers and helping them manage the stress associated with that transition from to being a father. And as we talk about what that looks like today, I want to make sure I say thank you to all your pilots. Thank you for all you all for joining us. I appreciate you, good fellas. One of the things I want to make sure I kind of get out the way in terms of housekeeping also is we're going to really be combating debunking myths as well. So, you know, you hear a lot about Black fathers being absent. Not only are these 4 sterling examples of how that's not true, statistically, it's already borne out saying that Black men are actually most likely to be involved in their child's lives than any other ethnicity. You hear, you know, myths about Black men being what you visualize when you see, when you think of a criminal or you think of someone in prison. And these are some of the factors that add to the trauma that Black people deal with, and Black men in particular. So understanding just kind of the outside influences that add to trauma. I would love for you fellas to spend a couple minutes apiece just tell me your perception of what trauma is and why is it so acute as relates to Black men, and what are some of the keys to overcoming it, given the tools and resources that you have at your disposal.
Well, thank you, Todd. I think we just jump in here, popcorn style.
Yes, for the first question, for sure, popcorn style. I like that. Thank you.
Awesome, man. So when we think about the definition of trauma, trauma is a deeply disturbing experience that causes psychological stress following a threatening experience. And let me say the word again, a threatening experience. And subsequent emotional disturbances may occur, including anxiety, sadness, post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of that threatening life experience. But also we can't forget to mention vicarious trauma, right? This notion of trauma happening to individuals becoming traumatized simply by hearing another person's experience with trauma. So trauma can not only be experienced as from the individual's perspective, but also a person can experience it by hearing it and seeing it on a day-to-day basis. And when we think about why trauma is important to Black men, I'm going to say this important. I want to make this very clear that everyone experiences trauma, right? But as it relates specifically to Black men, we experience trauma for things that no one should have to experience trauma for. Like, for example, I can get traumatized from fearing the police officer or group of individuals that made a vow to protect individuals in our community, but I fear them and I can get traumatized by seeing them. Who has to fear a person who is responsible for their safety on a day-to-day basis? That's what Black men have to do, right? We deserve to be safe in our own country and not fear a position that has made a vow to make sure that we are safe. Another example, Black men, particularly Black fathers in this day and age who are on the verge of having children as fathers, fear the future of their children who haven't even been born yet, right? Will my Black son or my Black daughter who's not here yet be shot down by police officers who took a vow to make sure that they will be protected in their own society? So when we think about what Black men deserve in that context, yes, we all experience trauma, but there's certain things that shouldn't traumatize us that other individuals don't have to worry about. I shouldn't be traumatized by an individual who made a vow to protect me, right? That is something that should not happen, but we do. We already think about the future of our kids before our kids are present. Those are things that we shouldn't have to worry about. So we deserve safety, to feel safe in our own country. We also deserve for our children to feel safe. Children who are here physically, also children who haven't even been conceived yet. And I can tell you, many fathers are thinking about the possibility of having kids and really questioning should they bring a kid into the world where they're not protected by their police officers. So that's my thoughts on trauma. Thank you, Todd, for that great question.
Thank you for sharing that answer, Dr. Daniels. Lorenzo Lewis, I'd love to dig a little bit into what he's talking about here and the concept of trauma and how it impacts how people even move in the world, where they go, how they go, and when they go there. It seems like the forum you've created through the Confess Project allows a setting for people to openly share some of the things they're dealing with day to day. And that's an incredibly meaningful way to help them address and get some mental health relief. Can you talk a little bit about how that's being used as a tool to help people not just identify trauma, but also overcome it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that Charles said it the best when you think about the experience of trauma, what it does to us physically and neurologically, to the fact where it truly can become a part of our trajectory. But more specifically, Todd, thank you again. Thanks for the opportunity. I believe that when we are really looking at the ways that trauma really shows up in our life, I know the one thing that I always really talk about is this kind of this long generational trauma and how that really shows up, over decades. And so one example was, I was born in a prison, right? My mother conceived me in a jail. And so I think about that in itself. And also, I ended up going and getting incarcerated in my juvenile years. And so that in itself, right, family members incarcerated, struggling from substance abuse, died from HIV, those systemic issues, those issues that come along in my generation and in my family. It was just because of the trauma that was endured from early on, that was prone to really happen, right? And so I think about those experiences, and those are very similar experiences now that what happens to Black men here in America. How do we move through that in that trauma, in that space? How do we show up to be seen, heard, and celebrated? And I believe that ability is to really connect and to really share those stories and share that journey with one another, but also to really not necessarily become resilient, but also to figure out what does it look like to have a healthy level of grit and balance in life, because that's really what it is. And so we're doing that, and the work that I do is taking that healthy balance and using barbershops, right? It's the healthy nuance of a conversation of a man to another man, or a man to a young man, or with a family, and how this can matriculate and create a healthy family and a healthy balance in the lifestyles of young men and their families. And so I think that in itself, by using that space, the epicenter, the Black barbershop, is one of probably the second oldest historical institution besides the Black church, right? And when you think about that in itself, it's a lot of power that takes place, and we can really overcome and I believe really push through to become our best selves, our best version of ourselves, by using that space in a place where we know have been used for political organizing and all other things around health and wellness. I think that in itself really shows a healthy balance of how we can overcome and become the best version of ourselves.
Yes, thank you. And in terms of discussing not only the ways that we can be healthy and well, you also brought to bear the importance of having just a really holistic approach to how we're dealing with mental health. So it's not just attacking mental health without recognizing the triggers and the traumas that people are being subjected to that continues to put them in the cycle where we're always on defensive, we're always struggling and dealing with so much more stress than many others. One of the reasons that I brought up the notions of stereotypes and debunking myths is when people in their mind associate Black, as they used to say, if you're Black, get back, where they associate Blacks with criminals, they associate Blacks with homelessness, they associate Blacks with poverty. When people, even with their best anti-bias forces or anti-racism forces, that's how systems and individuals and encounters are all framed, that has an impact. So that's why it's important to have not just programs like the Confess Project and all the incredible work you're doing to help fathers, Dr. Daniels, but also to have important work like what's going on at Mortar. So if you would, CEO Woods, kind of walk me through a little bit about not only just the work you all do, so people understand why that's an important tool to help people overcome trauma, but the ways in which you're equipping people to deal with trauma directly with not just opportunity, but also the holistic approaches that you're incorporating as well.
Absolutely. So also very appreciative to be here with all the other panelists. Lorenzo said something that really stuck out to me about the kind of historic trauma and how trauma can live, even if it's not your particular lived experience, how the memories of trauma generationally can still kind of dwell within the current times. And so when I think about what we do with entrepreneurship and how we are working in Black communities to give people the tools and resources that they need to start their enterprises or to grow and scale, there's been so much trauma that's been connected to Black legacy and Black wealth that, that is something that, is systemically feared, by a lot of people who hold views of white supremacy. So next year is the 100th commemoration of Black Wall Street's massacre. And when you think about the trauma that has taken place when Black people have businesses that are thriving, and the first opportunity that people have had to go in and destroy not just the churches and the individuals, but their businesses, and the threat that holds for a lot of people with white supremacist views, that is a thing that has still lived on in the Black economy. When you know that when you get too successful, as if that is a thing, if you get too successful, that there is a threat that you are going to be targeted because you've become too successful, or you've made too much money, or you have too much power in your community. There are people who are threatened by that, and then that could lead to bodily harm. It could lead to your business being destroyed. It could lead, and Black Wall Street is only one example of the many times that white riots have had that impact in the Black economy. So let's be clear that is one that a lot of people talk about, but it's not the only one. So a lot of what we do at Mortar is to give people the tools they need, the resources, the guidance, the mentorship, the guardrails to start these businesses right in their own neighborhoods, which a lot of times they are going through the trauma of displacement at the same time. They are going through the additional, challenges of not being an owner of the spaces that you live in. These are the same neighborhoods that had highways that ran through them because it was convenient. The same neighborhoods where you weren't allowed to purchase homes, and through redlining, we made sure that people weren't able to build up their wealth. And that same wealth is what you use to build a business. So we are having a lot of people who have experienced that either through history or through the evolution of their families. And so we are combating that by not only giving them the education, but also we're looking at what is the financial health that they have and can grow through building their own business. But then understanding that entrepreneurs are some of the people who take care of themselves the least because of the hustle mentality that we all live in, and the constant messaging of, I'll sleep when I'm dead, and all of this stuff that you see on Instagram, and all of the things where if you're not doing all of these things, you feel like you're not adequate. So we're incorporating a fully holistic approach to how we look at entrepreneurship. So it's not just about financial health, but we're also looking at mental health. We brought therapists in to one of our most recent cohort that was all Black men. We brought a therapist in to 3 different sessions to talk about emotions, trauma, anger, and other facets of our existence. And then lastly, we're adding a physical fitness component as well, where we're going to start incorporating more walks through our neighborhoods, just to kind of connect, bond, and take the time to, do those physical activities that ultimately help your mental health as well. So that's what we do at Mortar, and how we're challenging our entrepreneurs to holistically grow in this process.
Thank you for that. And I think if you're just joining us, you missed an incredible explanation of what trauma is by Dr. Daniels, and just kind of give high-level overviews of some of the things they discussed. Trauma is just a very emotionally trying and stressful experience that can stay with you and impact how you navigate life going forward. And it's a really meaningful thing that requires forums to address. And then CEO Lewis, creator of the Confess Project, talked a little bit about why it's important to leverage existing forums, institutions like barbershops to have a place to speak freely about what you're going through, try to get the support that you deserve and need. And then, of course, we had a chance to speak to Executive Director Woods about now you've got some support, but the bottom line is we still need people to be successful. And having mental strength is just a part of it. You also need the resources, the financial resources, the connections, the networks to build businesses. But also, it's important that people acknowledge the fact that building wealth and building a legacy in the Black community also comes with putting a target on your back, or putting yourself in a position where you understand that you're going to be looked at differently and seen differently. And historically, that's been a dangerous place to occupy. So you're put in danger just by virtue of existing, by being Black, because of all the different stereotypes and things that people viewing Blacks as criminals, as suspects, as being inhuman enough. So if you're killed, it's something that's treated differently than if a white person is killed. That's already kind of documented with one of the reasons why one of the leading causes of death for African Americans is death by a police officer. But then you consider with the fact that even when you are able to overcome all that, using some of those tools and strategies already been communicated, that you still have a target in your back for Black legacy and Black wealth. It kind of gets at a little deeper why it's so acute for African American males. Why trauma, even though it's ubiquitous, as was mentioned by Dr. Daniels, why is it that we in particular it seems like a heavier burden? And going into that, we talked about the notion of the importance of education. Executive Director Woods talked about education being a part of what they do, but it's also important to recognize that right now, trauma does a lot to stifle the talent in all communities, but particularly in the Black community, given how acute it is in the Black community. So that's why it's so important to have spaces and people who are advocating to fight and protect Black talent, Black genius, and cultivate it in a meaningful way, not just in narrow spaces, but in all spaces. And that's one of the things that Dr. Jackson is working on out there in North Carolina and beyond through Village of Wisdom. So if you don't mind, Dr. Jackson, talking a little bit about the work that you're doing to make sure that we're protecting and creating more spaces for Black genius to grow and thrive, and looping that in a little bit with why it's particularly necessary in our communities where we are acutely being exposed and expected to endure unspeakable amounts of trauma.
Yeah. So again, let me echo the thanks. Really excited to be on this panel with you good brothers. Some of y'all I know, and some of y'all I hope to know a lot better after this. Also, I want to give a shout out to Todd because he's fresh as a tack over there. The rest of us are t-shirts and button ups. So thank you for making us look bad, Todd. When I think about trauma, right, and I think about the work of Village of Wisdom, as y'all brothers were talking, I think, a lot of times, I think it's key to point out, right, that the systemic and historic nature of how we've built a system based on the privileging of the white man has also necessarily created stereotypes for Black folks to fit into and Black men to fit into, right? And so there is a particular type of trauma that's created when you can't see yourself in the identity that society has created for you, right? So we see so many of our young brothers struggling to try to find their identity because the one narrative that's spit out about Black men does not fit them, right? And so now I experience trauma as I try to find my own identity. And anybody that knows anything about education knows that like middle school is a really trying time for students because in middle school, you're trying to figure out who you are. Now, imagine if there was a system that basically said, if you don't fit into this mold, then you aren't the person who you say you are, right? And so that questioning in and of itself is disrupting a kid's ability to actually access education. Because if I'm in the back of my head thinking about the fact that you say that I'm not supposed to be here because I'm a Black man, you say that I'm too violent to be in this classroom because I'm a Black man, you say that I can't learn because I'm a Black man, that doesn't give me any time to focus on the calculus that you're talking about. It doesn't give me any time to focus on the math that you're talking about, the science, the social studies, or whatever. And what we know is that the brain is really a single processor, right? We only process a certain amount of information at one time. And so when folks talk about stereotype threat, what they're talking about is the fact that I am worried about thinking about the stereotype while I am trying to do an academic task. So Claude Steele is the researcher who brought this up. And basically he said that when you ask kids what their race is before they actually take a standardized test, that actually reduces their ability to do well on that test, because you're bringing up that stereotype to them. And so while they're taking a test, they're trying to disprove your stereotype.
Wow.
So it's a very cognitive process that we're talking about here. And that is why trauma is so important to the education environment. And that's why we have to be really, really careful, really, really thoughtful, and really, really deliberate about how we give Black children safe learning environments to learn so that they can access their full minds. Because frequently when we talk about the achievement gap, we don't talk about the fact that we actually are asking Black children to do more cognitive tasks in the classroom than we are white children, because they have to deal with stereotype threat, right? Because they have to deal with the fact that the way that the teacher is teaching to me right now doesn't actually match my cultural background. And so when I think about Village of Wisdom and the work that we're doing, the reason why, we say that we translate the wisdom of Black parents so that we can create more culturally responsive and culturally affirming learning environments. Why? Because Black parents and Black caregivers are our first teachers. They are the people who give us our first bits of knowledge. They are the people who transmit to us our first bits of culture. But what happens is that as soon as a Black child goes into a classroom, all of their culture is again then used as a weapon to traumatize them, right? Because I would bet most of the Black men on this conversation, on this call right now, have heard a teacher say, "You can't talk like that." Right? And what you're telling me when you say that is you're telling me that the way that my mama talk, the way my cousins and them talk is not valid. And so then again, that's another piece of trauma. That's something I got to worry about while I'm trying to learn your science, right? And so that's why it's so important that we're culturally responsive. But the other thing that's important that we're thinking about with Village of Wisdom is it's not just about the trauma, it's also about the cognition. We know that learning is connecting connecting new information to prior knowledge. So if our culture is what gives us our prior knowledge, and you invalidate all of our prior knowledge that we bring to the classroom, then how are we connecting new information to it? And so that's why it is so critical that we create culturally responsive and culturally affirming learning environments. And that's why Village of Wisdom is so dogged about doing that, because we know that fundamentally we are robbing Black children of their ability to learn when we deny their culture in bringing it to the classroom. And that is traumatic to me, even thinking about it vicariously, like you said, Charles. And right. Also, it is disruptive just because, hey, we can't actually learn. If we're serious about learning, then we have to be serious about this.
And that's beautifully said. And I think at the end of the day, there's two things I want to make sure I highlight amongst all the wisdom that you brought up. One, just the idea of every moment people are functioning outside of their home, their sanctuaries, a moment they have to overcome some perceived mistreatment or some actual mistreatment that's already embedded in society. I think institutionally, empirically, it's just been proven that Black people, Black men, are far more likely to not only be convicted of crimes, but also be wrongly convicted, to get a substandard education, and be subjected to the worst possible. So understanding that, it's really important to not just protect and create the spaces where you honor culture and protect people from, or at least provide some buffer to protect people from what they're being subjected to, but also in the way you're doing it, I think it's important to talk about it in the way of just creating a village and the real historic sense, and make sure we're looking after not just our own, but for others as well. You also know vicarious trauma. I know building off what Dr. Daniels mentioned, I want to pivot slightly to, as we talk about things like George Floyd and the uprising we've seen across the world, frankly, with people not testifying, but people going out and proclaiming and shouting out against injustice. If you can talk to me, I want to say on you, Dr. Jackson, since we just finished with you about talking about vicarious trauma, about why there's such a stark difference between sympathy, empathy, and action. If all these people who say they care actually care to the degree that they say they care, then why are things still, even in this short period of time where it seems like a record number of people are proclaiming to be conscious and allies in terms of not creating the meaningful institute, so people still have to worry about that, what things like what you mentioned when they send their kids to school and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, Todd. I mean, I think part of the challenge here, right, is when you talk about action, you know, I love going to this analogy, right? If you want a better body, right, then you got to go work out, right? You got to eat the cauliflower that Alan was talking about before we got on this call, right? Like,
Get them.
you gotta go to sleep, you know, at night, right? Which is what I don't do super well, right? Like, you got to stay away from those sugars. The thing is that the system that we're in, when we think about food, a lot of times makes it really easy for us to eat poorly, right? Now, when we think about the education system and where I'm at, it is largely incentivized to actually poorly educate Black children, right? Because the incentives are placed around academic achievement and performance. And there's just a lot of ways that schools can kind of trick and show like, oh, well, this is how we get to academic achievement. And frequently we aren't rewarded, right? We aren't incentivized for creating culturally responsive and culturally affirming learning environments. Right. So what I'm saying is it's like trying to go on a healthy food diet when you live in the food desert. It's difficult, right? Because that means that I can't walk across the street and go to Whole Foods. I got to get on a bus to go somewhere to get some healthy food. And even when I get there, I can't afford it. And that's the journey that I think a lot of educators are going on, because again, the other thing about our system is it kind of pits us against each other, right? So what we start doing is arguing with the educators who are underfunded in the first place to educate our children. But in reality, I live in a state, North Carolina, that has a 20-year case against it because constitutionally it has been underfunding education for the last 20 plus years. Right. So we're mad at teachers who are not making enough money for not teaching our kids right, when we need to be mad at these legislatures at the state office who have been underfunding this public education system for the last 20 plus years. Right. And I'm not even talking about the Black side of this situation, where when was the last time we actually got a fair and adequate education, if ever. Right. I guess what I'm saying is that one, the system makes it difficult for us to act like we're always working against it. So we're working against that inertia. And then I think the other thing, right, and this is I did the institution first, right, because I like to point out like institutional and systemic first. But then when we think about the personal is difficult because we don't like to acknowledge that we're not willing to make sacrifices and change. And we're not willing to acknowledge how we have done harm. And so what personal action looks like means that I, as a Black man who taught school in Atlanta public schools, was one of those teachers who said, you shouldn't talk like that. Right? Because until I acknowledge how I did harm, I can't change my own actions. And what the reality is that a lot of people aren't willing to do that. They are not willing to self-examine their participation in their own oppression and the oppression of other people. And they don't want to acknowledge the fact that they've been a part of a racist system. And that means they actually have to change their behavior to become effective liberators, to become effectively anti-racist, to become a part of the solution.
Yes, and I asked that they open up all the mics. So if you things that on your heart, you particularly want to jump forward. Don't wait for me to kind of shoot a question your way. Jump in, say something. Especially as it relates to what Dr. Jackson just mentioned about the notion of twofold. One, pushing back against an institution that has a train that has a 400-year head start, and that momentum is hard as hell to begin with. I got that. But then the second part of it is even recognizing and owning the fact that there's things that we are doing individually when we're spending time, partaking and engaging in the same behaviors that we say other people shouldn't. That may be, adding to the oppression of our own. I would love for someone to jump in and speak to that one way or another.
Let me chime in here. I think this is a great question, a great segue. I would really like to just call it out for what it is, right? Majority of us on this phone call have had a difficult and I would say fearful experience with the police in our lifetime, right? Where a police officer may have grabbed their gun or put a gun to us. None of us are excluded. My first experience was the age of 6, right? None of us are excluded from being in the elevator and having someone tuck their purse because they felt as if we were a threat, right? I'm pretty sure one of us have had that experience more than often. A lot of us have. No one is excluded from us walking down the street in a nice neighborhood and a police officer driving by at least 2 or 3 times to see if we were not supposed to be in that neighborhood, right? Probably didn't say nothing to us, but even thought about saying something to us. In most cases, they probably have, right? Another term that we need to bring up in this conversation is this term epigenetics, right? This notion that your environment really and what you've experienced will essentially be embedded in your DNA and how you function. So I think the reality of the situation is that our environment as Black men really conditions us to respond to certain situations. So when you see a Black man walking around with his guard up or fearful or looking angry, right? He's not crazy, the system is crazy, right? The system has conditioned him to respond that way. We're not waking up saying, hey, listen, I think you're a threat. I think everybody's a threat. Just for no reason, no apparent reason, right? We have been looked at as threats for the majority of our lives, and we are expected to act and function normally. In the boardroom, whether you're an executive leader, you're expected to raise money with limited resources when we know for certain that funders typically fund organizations that are white more than they fund Black leaders, right? That's a reality. So we are asked to do a lot with a little, with a small budget, make the world change, make sure that our budgets are in alignment with everything, make sure that our paperwork speaks great, the same as someone who has a multi-million-dollar budget.
Right.
Psychologically, that doesn't make any sense. You cannot place the same expectations on me as a Black man when I don't receive the same opportunities. And I think that's when society in America has messed up. You're expecting Black men to function from a traumatic standpoint where we have limited resources or no resources. I think that's a crock of BS, excuse my French, right? I think we have to be honest.
That wasn't even French, brother. That was a nice little punctuation. You can speak that French to us if you need to. Speak that French if you need to. Go for it.
I'm sorry, man. I just want to cuss right now, but I'm not, because Focus for Health has invited us here to be very professional. But I will say this too. There's also, as a Black father running an organization for fathers, my wife and I had this conversation recently. There are plenty of white women that come up to my wife and I say, hey, you know what? Your son is so cute. He's so cute. My son is 5 years old. He'll be 6 years old in October. But I know when he turns 15, he will no longer be cute to them. So let's call it a spade. There's a reality that Black men have to live with who have children. There's a moment where your kids are cute, and there's a moment where your kids will be a threat, right? And there's a transition where they will always be cute to you and be cute one day and a threat another day. So when we think about this term of epigenetics and how we are conditioned to be traumatized, or epigenetics and how we are conditioned to actually say, you know what, I should be afraid of my life and I should be afraid of the lives of those that look like me, because we are walking around here with big S's on our back for no apparent reasons, expecting to do the same thing as our white counterparts with limited to no resources. And I think we have to really just call a spade and be honest, because the reality is the platform is not the same for us. And although we're hurting, we're expected to act normal. But we deserve to receive an opportunity to not be normal, to say, you know what, I'm hurting. And I deserve to say, hey, if I want to walk around and be angry as hell one day, let me be angry. But don't try to kill me because I look angry.
Right.
That's one of the things I appreciate that, Dr. Charles. Like one of the things that I wanted to actually add into that conversation is some of the trauma of code switching in general, specifically in philanthropy and in nonprofits, and how you show up determines how much money of the fraction of money we were going to give anyway, but how much more we're going to divide that up based on how close to white middle class norms you present. I know that for me and little Lorenzo over there, we're smaller guys, so there's an additional component of being a threat that comes with being smaller guys like me and Lorenzo. So we have to go above and beyond to make people feel comfortable when we're around because of our stature, because it's already, kind of embedded in that we are going to be threats in general. And then when you have, more size, then it's even more like I have to come in a certain way. So I might have to smile a little more than I had planned on it, just to make sure that you know that I'm not a threat. I was thinking the other day, you know, as we're walking, you know, I've been trying to get more into walking and exercising and seeing people on the sidewalk. And I was noticing that when white women are on the sidewalk, I tend to move over even more than I normally would move for anybody in general, just to make sure that there's no questions of space or any of that. And even, you know, obviously in COVID, we give space anyway, but like I'm giving additional space. I'm not making eye contact with a lot of people, or I'm going out of my way to make eye contact and smile and wave and do all the things, just so you know that there's nothing to fear here, you know? And so that's an additional challenge that has kind of been embedded into a lot of Black men in general. As Dr. Charles was mentioning, like that behaviorally, we have to show up in what sometimes feels like an inauthentic way to make everybody else in the room feel comfortable, and so that we can make it home. I mean, ultimately, that's what the goal is. When I leave, I'm trying to make it back home. And if that means that I got to smile a little bit extra and I have to be a lot more friendly than I had planned on it, because it's a lot of things going on in my head. And sometimes I'm just thinking, I'm not mad. I'm thinking about the things that happen in my day like everybody else. But I don't have the freedom that other people have to express emotion, or to not express emotion, because of the standards and the codes that still exist in our communities.
And you brought up something really important, Executive Director Woods. I think I want to highlight, and then I'll transition to you, of course, of Creator Lewis, about the notion of having to be superhuman, basically. Not only do we need to manage our day-to-day stress like everyone else with fewer resources, fewer opportunities, we also have to manage it in a way to make you feel comfortable, to go out of our way to make sure we're presenting ourselves and not just exhibiting the resilience to endure all the trauma. And for a conversation like this, it's so hard not to spend like all the time on just the magnitude of the trauma and really the impact of it. But we're going to try to pivot to what Black men deserve right after this with you, CEO Lewis. So if you can start thinking about what you're going to add to that. But then the added dimension of how am I presenting? How am I distancing myself from people? How am I communicating in a way? Everything I'm doing is in a way to make you the least uncomfortable, given that I understand you already have these biases. And I also know that you're not going to create a space for me to just be myself. So understanding, and that's, you know, I've been dressing like, as I say, dressing like an asshole since I was like 5 years old. Because mom was like making sure that you got to wear suits, you got to wear button-up stuff, you can't have your pants down. That's how people will see you. And that will impact your opportunities that are made available for you. But she saw how that impacted my brother, and my older brother is 15 years older. And she didn't want that to be my lot in life, so to speak. So from a young age, I was wearing this Poindexter nonsense, understanding that in time, this would be something I'm comfortable when I get used to wearing, but also understanding in a way it's kind of an armor to protect me, give me a little more room for error. And in a world where we have none or very little at most, and you see everyone else in the world has entire neighborhoods with a room for error, versus a small little bit. But we've talked about the trauma, we've identified it, why it's more acute in our communities, why it's more acute, particularly the struggle of Black men. And we talked about how to overcome it, some of the resources you all make available through your incredible programs. Let's spend as much time as you can now on what Black men deserve. So if you don't mind, Lorenzo, talking us through understanding that we have to deal with all this nonsense, all this mess, this additional burden. What is it that Black men deserve? What is it that we should be asking for? What should people be given, given the fact that all this is so clear and so present?
Right, right. Absolutely. So, I'll tell you, it's been a blast over here. And the few things that really come to my mind is that, you know, Black men deserve to be seen, heard, celebrated, and to be enjoyed, right? And as Dr. Jackson said, to not just only be tolerated. And so, we deserve to be gentle with ourselves. One thing that I'm really, that I think I go into a long version of when I'm speaking to my barbers and to the men in the communities that we serve is that, hey man, just be gentle with yourself, right? And like take that time and know that, you know, we're in a world relatively that may not want to really deal with us. But like when we know that we are, you know, bringing our best to the table, that we, you know, it's I think to really sit into that. And so I think just being gentle with yourself. And I think even Dr. Charles could even understand, like in therapy and in the therapeutic framework, is that, you know, that self-care really also ties into that. Is we have to personally accept, you know, where we are and what our journey is, because we're all on a different journey, no matter, regardless of where we at in our trauma. And just like I went through a lifetime of trauma, and I shouldn't be here on this call with you guys. Relatively, I am, but that may not be somebody else's case that's went through some similar issues. And so we have to be gentle with ourselves and where we are in that journey personally. And then I think, you know, outwardly, right? It's like, what do we deserve? We, you know, yes, we deserve, you know, good policy. We deserve, you know, better laws, better communities, you know, food justice, all these macro things that we notice, unfortunately, is going to take a long time to get to, and where our world is really going. And I think that, you know, really coming together, right? And really, you know, one thing, another thing that I think with Black men is that we deserve to respect one another, right? And to honor each other, because another thing that we're fighting with the world and the trauma that's coming within us, but we're also fighting with ourselves. And a lot of Black men, particularly, we don't too much like ourselves because we didn't like our daddies. We didn't get along with our mothers because of their trauma. And so that outward trauma came on us in our upbringing, and we don't like our own brothers and sisters, right? And so these are like some things that it's very personal, because I talk to men, and I know I've had my own challenges with close family members, close friends, and particularly it started because of their trauma and how it erupted our relationship, right? And so I think that we really have to address that very micro and direct thing of how we deserve to be loved, cared for, but we deserve to be connected, right? And really starting with ourselves, and then the people that's directly next to you, right? Because I've been in scenarios where, you know, where I'm at now in life, in a situation where, you know, people like obviously probably feel like, hey, I should still be in jail, and I shouldn't be able to be in this position where I'm able to help change the community that I once destroyed. And so I'm having to even fight with that nuance and that leader that, you know, saying that this kid should be behind bars. And so I think that we really got to really deal with ourselves, that micro connection of who's directly next to us, before we really try to go out and also help, you know, on that macro, because I think we're really at war with ourselves more than what we realize. And then I think that we really we have to resolve that war within inside and directly in our homes and directly around us. One thing that I had to forgive really, really close people around me before my life really started to thrive, right? And I always say that sometimes we have to do that in order to see that we really want things to be in our favor. So.
And I think you brought up the notion of self-care, which is so important. Dr. Jackson talked about he gets too little sleep. Executive Director Woods, we've been razzing him about this cauliflower, about how important it is to be healthy. And you mentioned the notion of being gentle with yourself, but also being willing to acknowledge some of the trauma that you've experienced within the family context or otherwise, and being willing to forgive and love people past whatever the issue may have been in the upbringing or beyond. Does anyone else want to give us a couple of tidbits about self-care, but also get to more the macro stuff of what Black men deserve?
One of the things that I loved that list that Lorenzo did, and I wish that I had written every one of those pieces down, but you're recording, so that's beautiful, because I want to watch that back. One of the things that Black men deserve is patience, and that is from exterior forces, but then also internally as well, which kind of ties back into the being gentle with yourself. There's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves to succeed. There's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves to not be like previous generations, or to be what we want our children to experience, and to fill the gaps that maybe we didn't have when we were growing up, and we're trying to overcompensate as fathers and as husbands and as friends and brothers, and we're trying to do everything, and everything got to be perfect, you know. And in this process of trying to build this false perception of perfection, like we got to be patient with ourselves. Like we are flawed individuals that are not going to get it right every day. We're going to get frustrated while we're trying to help our kids with their homework, and we might give some abbreviations like Dr. Charles, like in that process, because it's frustrating. Like if I wanted to be a teacher, I would be teaching. And right now I'm finding myself, trying to support my wife as she supports our kids as they do their homework. But it's just one of those things where we just need to give ourselves more patience. And then we also deserve more credit. Like give ourselves the credit for the things that we have accomplished. I'm terrible at that. My wife tells me all the time to take the time out to acknowledge the things that I have accomplished already. And I think that for us, I'll speak for me. For me, a lot of times it's not enough. I don't know that there will ever be enough things that I can accomplish to make me feel like I used all of my time here on this earth in the way that I should have. And so that's going to require some things for me and some growth in my therapy journey to understand that, I am enough, I've done enough, and I'm doing enough, and that I don't have to try to work myself to the bone and stay up all hours of the night to overdo to feel like I'm doing enough. So that would be a couple of things I would contribute to what Lorenzo put out as well.
And I think that kind of gets to, let me get to it, and I'll make sure I direct this question to you, Dr. Daniels. Okay. But you actually brought it up. But I think and you mentioned also kind of what I call the John Henry syndrome. We're always competing against the machines, basically, and working ourselves to death just to put ourselves in a position to be seen and heard and receive the support we deserve. And I'm not talking about, emotional support here. In this case, I'm talking about basic resources, responding to the extent that there's ever been a meritocracy. When you've got organizations, and I'll even use us as an example, it's frustrating to us in social change when we can pass 23 laws and help thousands of people and serve 250,000 pounds of food during COVID, and we're still being offered 1,000 or 5,000 from these philanthropy organizations that are giving 150,000 to white organizations doing far less with far more resources. So as we talked about the micro stuff, which is important, but I think I would love for you, Dr. Daniels, to kind of segue a bit into some of the macro stuff and just the abject discrimination and wrongful denial of resources that are merited and deserved, because it's so much harder for us to get the returns that we need in our communities and beyond.
Thank you so much, Todd. That's a great question. And man, you just followed my spirit, because I definitely want to touch on that. Alan and Lorenzo did good with the therapy piece, but I really want to touch on that. I'm so happy that you asked that question. Personal example, right? Before my wife and I could get our mortgage for our home, my credit was checked 7 times.
Damn.
My bank account was checked 7 times. Does this gentleman really have this amount of money in the account, right, for that down payment? Is his credit score really that good? Checking to see if the amount would all of a sudden, if the amount in the bank account would automatically just disappear, and if my credit score would automatically decrease substantially after the 6th time they check it, right? I'd like to compare that to this notion of philanthropy, right? And I want to speak specifically to the funders on the call, or individuals who have access to excess resources, right? As a Black man, and I think we all can agree on this call, as a Black male leader or Black female leader or person of other color, we deserve to be trusted. See, the reality is that I have to work just as hard for you to trust me with your money than someone who is white. That's the reality of the situation, and we have to call a spade, right? I think one of the issues that's connected to that is that we have to make sure that we have to be close to perfect just to even be trusted to get a substantial amount of money, right? Why is it that I have to make sure that even though I didn't go to school for business, that everything has to be close to perfect across the board, right? Without the specific coaching. I've seen organizations in my community who've been around for over 20 years who don't have half the budgets of individuals, white individuals who come into my community, create these apps and new ideas, who went to MIT or Harvard, their budgets, right? Their budgets are substantially lower, although the results are higher for the organizations that have been around the longest. The only difference that comes to mind for me is the color of their skin, right? Back to this notion of code switching, right? I have to appease, I have to smile all the time, I have to shake hands, I have to do follow-up emails, I have to make sure that I thank you immensely, even when you don't respond to my calls, That gets tiresome. I'm tired of calling you, don't call me back. I'm tired of seeing I'm tired of seeing well, you ain't emailing me back, right?
Right.
We're doing the work. The results show. Our community members are speaking about the results. Why is it that I have to go the extra miles? I know philanthropy people, and I know individuals who run organizations who don't look like me, who know individuals who gave them $1 million, although the results have not been there, because the concept has been proven to be effective based on the research. Well, I can't bring a concept to you as a Black leader. I got to show you some results, because you ain't gonna follow me just on concepts. That doesn't work for right? So I think we have to be honest across the board. When we're thinking about what is it that Black men deserve or Black leaders deserve, we deserve a fair shot, right? Yes, we can produce results. Yes, we know what we're doing, but we know what we're doing without the coaching, without the degrees. Most of us, I know many Black leaders who are doing excellent work who doesn't have the necessary degrees that a lot of us have on this call, right? But they deserve to be funded the same way that individuals who have degrees. And us Black individuals with degrees or not degrees, we deserve to be the same, funded the same as our white counterparts with proven concepts that haven't even been proven yet, but research proven, but not necessarily in the community. And I think as funders, when you look at your portfolio, you see, okay, is a breakdown of where my funding is going mainly geared towards white leaders as opposed to Black leaders? Is there equal distribution across the board, right? What is it that I'm investing in, right? I think we deserve to be trusted, but we also deserve a chance. I know many leaders that if you gave them the coaching that perhaps they don't have the degrees for and go to school for, if you gave them the coaching and the guidance, they will give you what you gave them, right? They will produce those that you want them to produce. They already know how to do the work. They just need the chance. So we deserve a chance and we deserve to be trusted. Trust me. Trust me.
Yes. And I think it's incredible when you listen to people like Dr. Daniels. I mean, you can't get more educated than Dr. Daniels. I mean, he's got more letters next to his name than the French he articulated early. He's got about 12 letters indicating all the, just how much of a scholar and how committed and dedicated he is to excellence, not just in terms of work in the community, but also work at education academically. So if you're not going to trust someone like Dr. Daniels, not trust someone like Executive Director Woods or CEO Lewis, folks who have been proving their impact, then you're really not about investing in impact and really helping people. You're about helping people you just want to support. And that's where you start to get the frustrations because the dichotomy is clear. I would love for you to add a little bit to this, Dr. Jackson, in terms of kind of the macro level, not just about, I would love to talk about what philanthropy can do to do better, but also on the macro end, what Black men deserve as well.
Yeah, I mean, listening to y'all brothers, it made me think of two things. One, we should be able to define what Blackness is, right? Like, we deserve to be able to define our own Blackness, and we deserve to be able to define our own masculinity, and not to have to fit inside of anybody's box or feel like we need to fit into somebody's box because of our Blackness. I am tired of code switching. I am tired of worrying about your interpretation of my masculinity. And really, I'm not going to subject myself to that trauma anymore, because what I found out is it don't matter. I can do all this stuff. I can try to talk this way. I can try to put my language in, you know what I mean? And at the end of the day, like, either you're going to fund me or not, you know what I mean? And so right. I think, and for us, it's particularly acute. You hear us talk about funding, but right, either you're going to give me the grade or not. Either you're going to give me the job or not. Either you're going to give me this opportunity or not. You know what I mean? And I think the thing is that when we have to try to sacrifice our masculinity and like try to do it in these performative ways that society tells us that like we got to be hypersexual or we got to be this or that to kind of like perform this masculinity for you, what we do is we lose ourselves, right? And ourselves are the most important thing that we can contribute to our own liberation. And that's what, Lorenzo was talking about, this internal fighting that we're doing. We're doing this internal fighting with ourselves because we're trying to match somebody else's definition of us. And I am fucking tired of doing it. I won't do it anymore, right? So, and the thing that comes with the race piece, right, with this code switching piece is that you want us to turn off our culture so that you can understand us. But what you forget is the second that when Black people turn off our culture, then we turn off ourselves to other Black folks. And so then we lose our ability to be relevant in our own communities. And so if I want to participate in my own liberation, I cannot be your puppet of white supremacy. It does not equate, it does not work. So what I deserve, what Black men deserve, is to be able to define our own notions of success through our own notions of Blackness and through our own notions of masculinity.
I would love for you to dig a little deeper as we get into this notion of Black masculinity. The oasis for Black masculinity and Black conversation amongst men is the barbershop. So I know if anyone's engaging in this conversation on a regular basis, what Black masculinity looks like and what code switching is like and all the nonsense that we deal with day to day, you're probably hearing and seeing and feeling as much as anybody, Lorenzo. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about what Dr. Jackson's saying and maybe add a little piece about what funders can do and what we need systemically for.
Absolutely, yeah. I think about this in a way where it's relatively personal. I grew up here in the South. I'm in Arkansas, and you think about the racial discrimination. You think about the historic civil rights. You think about the Tuskegee experiment. All of these historic issues around our health, social issues here, particularly just in the South. Well, when you're thinking of that context and you're thinking about joy and folks, men thriving and being able to be supported and heard, we're very limited. Historically, when you just think about some of that, how healing really shows up and how it hasn't been able to really show up based on, because we just haven't had, truly that space to really heal. And even when the case was, we're told how to heal, right? We're told, it's now a stigma, even, crying publicly or, men talking about their emotions and being told they're weak or they're crazy or, me, I'm a bigger guy. So I even, in most contexts, like in certain spaces, me coming off to be maybe too not harsh could really be seen as, maybe they're questioning my sexual orientation for whatever reason, right? And so that's, I think, the nuances in Black masculinity and some of the things that we're combating there in the barbershop work is that, regardless if you are, a part of the LGBTQ community, but regardless of whatever you come from, whoever you, however you show up in your life, that you should be respected and loved and cared for. And I believe that society, right? And I think that, in our Western civilization, we've been, told that we gotta show up this certain way. And so I think that, it's a lot of that is just unpacking that wouldn't. And so a lot of times I ask men, like, what does masculinity look like to you? And the way that it comes to you is the way that you should really show up. You know what I mean? And so I think that's really important, is that we should understand what that looks like to us. And we got to move away from, again, like you said, having to feel like we're, hypersexual, overprotective, need to strike up a fight anytime somebody says something, what you may deem is out of line. We don't have to pose in that, fit in that narrative. That's not who we have to be. And so I think that's the work that we're also addressing, is that identity piece with men. And really, because I think a lot of men are still over 30 years old and they're really confused of who they need to become, right? And it's because they're still fighting that little boy that's looking out the window at 8 years old, right? And even at 15 years old, and they're still trying to figure that out because parts of their life, somebody said that they need to be this type of man. Or fit your uncle's description of who he was when he was a young raging man at 25 years old, and that's just not who we're going to be. And so I think that we really have to really accept like who we're going to become. Again, what do Black men deserve is to what you spoke about. We do deserve to be trusted, right? And like we have to move away from this stigma and these issues around we're not going to do the right thing, and this judgment factor. I went a long time starting this work, particularly. I'm not a clinician by trade, and I did over 10 years in the field. I've personally been diagnosed with depression. I personally went through the issues. I'm from the community I serve. I understand the medical and the contextual knowledge of my work. And even still, like, I'm deemed to not be appropriate in some spaces. But a lot of it is because 2% of Black men are psychiatrists, 4% are clinicians of color. And in the field, it's rooted in white supremacy, right? It's rooted that I don't have enough status to go out and do what I do and do it effective. So I'm either shunned, talked about, or we may not deemed to be appropriate, or I got to figure out a way to load my board up with clinicians so that I can be appropriate. And that's, you know, again, when we're only doing one part of the work is really educating and advocating for folks. And so I think that is that's just a little bit of my personal journey. And I think that we definitely deserve to be loved and respected and more than just tolerated, you know.
So Black men deserve to be trusted. Black men deserve to be themselves, to be loved, to be respected. We deserve equal opportunity to get funding of significance, equal opportunity to get a quality education, equal opportunity. And then when we say equal opportunity, let's not ignore the science and the data here. I think at the end of the day, if whatever system is currently in place is showing disproportionately that Black people are getting a short end of the stick, equity comes in. That's when we have to do something to acknowledge that issue, not just say it's an issue, but to act on it in such a way to remediate that, to make it right. There's a lot of conversation right now about what reparations should look like, could look like. One basic step is to make sure that everyone's getting access to sort of educational opportunities that Dr. Jackson's talking about, or sort of supports in terms of building businesses that CEO Woods is talking about, or making sure when people like, you know, Creator Lewis, who's got this incredible concept that he's proven that's going on in cities across the nation, that you don't give him a decimal point to the left of what other people are getting for programs that don't do nearly as much in terms of impact. So I think as we really dig deep into what Black men deserve, it's not just how you treat it interpersonally, being loved, respected, not just tolerated, but appreciated so people can truly be themselves, but making sure that you meaningfully combat these systems that make it impossible for people to leave flip. Because there's so many things you have to combat along the way. Make sure that police are not just respecting us, but the laws make it such that they must. Make sure we're not just getting a decent education in terms of access, but making sure the laws and structures are in place so we're getting the education that we can demonstrate is appropriate, not just inadequate as it's been since history. And I think that's one of the things when we're kind of unpacking what Black men deserve. It's not just on the individual level or even the macro level, it's all of it. It's all of it. Do y'all want to speak a little bit towards reparations or anything before we wrap up? Also, if people are listening, you got questions, shoot them in the chat and we'll try to make sure those are addressed, because you won't find a better panel of experts to speak to whatever questions come to mind. I just want to make sure I remind you all of that. Hope you're enjoying everything you're hearing and being edified in all sorts of ways, but I'm sure there's some questions that the wisdom that's been brought to bear is about your mind. We make sure those are at least heard briefly. We understand people are short on time, so we only have a few more minutes, so definitely ask it as soon as possible. But in the meantime, I love of CEO Woods, you can tell us a little bit about the debate about reparations. You hear a lot about it now. It's time to do something different, do something better than what's been done previously. To not just say, okay, treat people better, but what are we gonna do for all the mistreatment that people had to endure for centuries?
Yeah, I think, and I've actually had this conversation in some boardrooms in some of the national headquarters of some of the banks specifically. I think that for one, there needs to be an acknowledgement. And then I think that there also needs to be a path forward that undoes some of the things that have been done. So it's not enough even to just say, you know, hey, this has happened. There needs to be a path forward. So for example, in the banking institution, if there was a system of redlining, there now needs to be a system of green lighting, and it can't be opportunity zones that are not designed for people who look like me. It has to be opportunities for people who look like me from the community to get the opportunity to actually own property and build businesses within their communities. And, you know, 3 other words that I would add to the conversation about reparations: cut the check.
I appreciate that. That's a new hashtag we need to have trending. You want to add to that, Dr. Jackson? I saw that made you smile extra broadly when he said that, cut the check.
I just appreciate terse statements. You know, what's understood doesn't need to be said. So.
Okay. Well, no questions I see coming in through the chat. If there's anything you fellows want to add, now's the time. But short of that, I would just want to say thank you all for dedicating your time. You're immensely busy individuals, personally in your private life, but also in your public life for what you're doing to save humanity from itself and make sure we have a true chance to thrive. So thank you all for your contributions to humanity. With that, let you find social media and all that, so you can increase your followership so more people can continue to glean your wisdom after this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate you, man, for all the work and effort you put into getting us to this conversation. Y'all don't know this, but Todd was up late at night sending text messages. He was trying to make sure he got some responses, y'all. So he put a lot of work into this and getting this ragtag group of us together and making sure he could represent us well. So we appreciate you, Todd.
Well, I appreciate that, man. But yeah, let people know if you're on Instagram, Twitter, whatever it may be, your websites, shoot that out. I'm sure it'll be posted, but also to the point people are listening now. I know We Are Mortars, one at the Confess Project, at Village of Wisdom. But whatever other information you want to provide about your organization, I'll make sure that you don't miss the window. So then your philanthropy arm and your organization is like, why didn't you say this? Like this is your chance to say that.
Yeah. I'll just say real quick, if y'all want to hit us up, we're at villageofwisdom.org or blackgenius.com. We got both of those sites. Like Todd said, we're on at Village of Wisdom on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to follow my very infrequent shenanigans on Twitter, I'm at P period.
Appreciate that. Lorenzo, Alan.
Yes. We can be found at www.theconfessproject.com. It's the Confess Project on all your social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And definitely look forward to connect. Thank you again, Todd, Jackson, Alan, Green. Yeah, appreciate you all. It's definitely been a good time.
Absolutely. And then for all of the Mortar happenings, all of our social media and website are We Are Mortar, and that's WeareMortar. All of mine are just call me Alan. I keep it simple. Just call me Alan. And thank you again to the Siegel Family Foundation, Focus for Health. Specifically, the conversations that we had with Focus for Health earlier this year helped us to kind of confirm the direction we were going with kind of being more holistic with our entrepreneurship, academy. So I'm really thankful for those conversations and being a part of conversations like this, because they're definitely needed. And you hear a lot of foundations and organizations talk about how needed it is to have the conversation, but for them to kind of step up and facilitate the conversation and make sure that it had, what are now, what's left, we got 3 Echoing Green fellow, that are here. Welcome Lorenzo to, he's part of the new crop, so, and William's OG out here. So, so he's glad to be in good company, man. Glad to be in good company.
And I am a failed applicant, so I want to make sure
I
like that.
Man. I did it 3 times before we got in.
So I'm a wannabe Echoing Green, but I am Todd Belcore at socialchange.site, like website, and at Shy Social Change, at NYC Social Change, at SAC Social Change, LA Social Change. And I appreciate all you brothers for taking the time. I'm sorry I was kind of stalking y'all low-key, trying to make sure that y'all had a chance to weigh in on some of my thoughts with the direction of this. But thank you, of course, to the Focus for Health Foundation, Barry Siegel, Martin Siegel, Laura, Jen, for really allowing us to have free reign here. I mean, it's one thing to say you want to host a conversation of this magnitude of this importance, but to allow us to speak freely and be free is exactly what we need more of and what Black men deserve. So thank you for your time, everyone. God bless y'all. Have a great day, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Appreciate y'all.